Federal Drug Enforcement Administration says a week-long cartel crackdown led to nearly 200 arrests just in New England. The DEA says they were all members of the Sinaloa cartel, the largest drug cartel in the world.
At first glance, they were just freight trains, metal beasts rolling across America carrying electronics, textiles, and automotive parts. Nobody paid them any attention. But beneath their ordinary exterior lurked a terrifying secret: soundproofed compartments, hidden cages, and kidnapped victims.
I'm Avery Haynes, riding on top of a train through Mexico, a train with some ominous names. La Bestia, El Tren de la Muerte, the Beast, the Train of Death.
For years, one man exploited the nation's rail system, moving people like cargo. When the FBI discovered the truth, Operation Iron Chain was launched, revealing horrors that would shock the country and forever change how law enforcement views infrastructure. When kidnapping learned to move, how America's railways became rolling prisons. The freight train looked painfully ordinary. A CSX line 47 cars long rolling east from Seattle toward Chicago along one of the most routine commercial routes in the country. The manifest was dull in the way logistics paperwork is supposed to be. Electronics, automotive parts, textiles. Nothing flashy, nothing suspicious. Trains like this crossed America every day, threading cities, farmland, deserts, and mountains without anyone paying attention. And that was the point. Because cars 17, 23, 31, 38, and 42 were not carrying cargo. From the outside, they blended in perfectly. Rusted steel, weather-beaten panels, identical to thousands of other boxcars rattling along American rails. No markings, no visible alterations, but inside those 5 cars were people. Prisoners locked into secret compartments engineered to be invisible, silent, and constantly in motion. Mobile cells racing across the country at 70 miles per hour. Kidnapping is one of humanity's oldest crimes. Long before laws, borders, or police forces existed, people understood a simple truth: control the body, and you control everything else. In the ancient world, abduction was blunt and public. Raiders seized villagers during wars, dragging captives away in chains. Marcus Devine didn't invent kidnapping, he refined it. He took an ancient crime and fused it with modern logistics. Transcontinental Logistics was founded in 2018, publicly positioned as a discrete freight company serving high-value clients. Devine, a former railroad executive with deep industry ties, understood infrastructure better than most. His net worth climbed to an estimated $240 million. On paper, his company moved sensitive cargo quietly and efficiently. In reality, it moved people. For 6 years, Transcontinental operated a mobile prison system hidden in plain sight: 23 trains, 117 modified boxcars. They stayed in near constant motion, never stopping long enough to invite inspection. They crossed state lines endlessly, slipping through jurisdictional cracks faster than paperwork could follow. Political dissidents, whistleblowers, journalists, witnesses, business rivals, estranged spouses bound by inconvenient legal agreements. Anyone wealthy clients wanted gone. The price was fixed: $2 million per person. Over 6 years, 847 people were transported inside those rolling cells. Some were held for weeks, others for months, locked in darkness while clients decided what should happen next. A few were released in remote locations: Montana wilderness, Alaskan tundra, with threats carefully delivered to ensure silence. Many were never released at all, executed during night stops. Bodies discarded across forests, deserts, and mountain ranges where distance dissolves evidence. America's size did the rest. This was Operation Iron Chain, the moment federal investigators realized the nation's rail system had been turned into a weapon. Those boxcars weren't just hauling freight, but prisons. And that right now, 23 trains were moving across the country with 156 living prisoners hidden inside. Agents understood the stakes immediately. Stop the trains simultaneously, or risk panic. Operators could execute prisoners, sabotage cars, trigger derailments that would kill captives and crew alike. There would be no second attempt. The brilliance of Divine's system wasn't cruelty. It was how he kept things constantly moving. In a pitch to investors later recovered by the FBI, he explained it without hesitation. "Law enforcement raids buildings," he said. "They can't raid trains in motion. By the time they get a warrant for a specific car, it's crossed 3 state lines. Different jurisdiction, warrant becomes invalid. We're always ahead." From an operational security standpoint, he was right. From every other standpoint, it was pure evil. The modified boxcars were engineering achievements in the worst possible sense. From the outside, nothing gave them away. Inside, they were self-contained confinement units, soundproofed walls, air filtration systems pulling oxygen from outside, chemical toilets, water tanks, ration storage. Everything necessary to keep a human alive except light. Prisoners lost their sense of time within days. One guard who later cooperated with investigators testified that detainees quickly stopped asking how long they'd been there. Without a day-night cycle, a week felt like a month. A month felt endless. Psychological torture without leaving a mark. The FBI didn't stumble onto the operation by chance. It began with a pattern buried inside missing persons data. Special Agent Jennifer Morrison noticed an anomaly. High-profile disappearances that didn't behave like normal abductions. No ransom demands, no digital trails, no bodies. Some cases were explainable, some are labeled as witness protection, others are termed as voluntary disappearances. But 47 cases shared something unsettling. Each person vanished within 24 hours of a freight train passing through their area. Each location sat near an active rail corridor. Morrison mapped the disappearances against rail schedules. The overlap was undeniable. Transcontinental logistics trains appeared near every case. Statistical probability dropped below 1%. "We need to inspect these trains," Morrison told her team. That's when the trap revealed itself. By the time a warrant was issued in Illinois, the train was already in Iowa. By the time Iowa approved, it was in Nebraska. Jurisdiction evaporated mile by mile. They're exploiting the delay, Morrison realized. They're moving faster than the law. The FBI adapted. With special authorization, agents placed GPS trackers on suspected cars during brief service stops. Routes were mapped, schedules logged. Over 3 months, all 23 trains were tracked and the modified cars identified. Then came the break they hadn't expected. Michael Torres was an investigative journalist digging into corporate corruption when men broke into his home. He was drugged and disappeared overnight. He woke in darkness, disoriented, with the unmistakable sensation of motion beneath him. "It's a train," he muttered to himself. What his captors didn't know was that Torres had planned for enemies. He had an emergency beacon surgically implanted, activated by a specific pressure sequence. A silent panic button broadcasting his location via satellite. When the signal lit up at FBI headquarters, Morrison knew instantly what it meant. "We've got a beacon moving westbound on a CSX line," an analyst said. "Speed consistent with freight." Morrison didn't hesitate. "He's in one of the cars." Stopping a freight train isn't simple. Engineers need cause. Law enforcement can't just demand a halt without jurisdiction. The train was cutting through rural Wyoming, far from population centers. "Get Wyoming Highway Patrol," Morrison ordered. "Loop in Amtrak police. We've got an active kidnapping." Coordination took 2 hours. By the time approvals came through, the train had crossed into Montana, and the ancient crime, refined by steel, speed, and silence, was still moving. Operation Iron Chain, rescuing prisoners on the move. Coordination was critical. Inside one of the trains, Michael Torres sat in total darkness, unsure if anyone was coming to save him. Time had blurred. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. Then finally authorization came through. The Montana Railroad Authority ordered an emergency stop. The engineer complied, halting the freight train in a remote area outside Billings. Helicopters appeared overhead, swirling like vigilant hawks as the FBI tactical team descended to surround the train. "FBI, We have information about a kidnapping victim aboard this train. Conducting search now, agents shouted into radios. The train crew was baffled. This is a freight train, no passengers. You can open all the cars. Standard cars were checked. Electronics, automotive parts, textiles, all matched the manifest. But car 23? That one was different. Armed guards blocked the entry. This is private cargo. You need a specific warrant. The FBI agent's response was cuttingly simple. That is our warrant. Open it or we breach. Realization hit the guards like a thunderclap. Resistance was impossible. The car doors opened. Michael Torres blinked against the sudden light, alive but disoriented. You're safe, agents reassured him. How long have you been here? He stammered. Days? Weeks? October 13th, an agent said. It's October 15th. The 2 days felt like a lifetime. A meticulous search revealed what Morrison had feared. This was not an isolated incident. Documents, prisoner lists, and records of 6 previous occupants, detailing where they'd been released or disposed of, lay scattered inside the car. This was an organized system, a network spanning miles of rails. Morrison acted fast. We need to stop every transcontinental train immediately. Multi-state coordination of this scale was nearly unprecedented. 23 trains, crossing 17 states, all to be halted within a narrow 30-minute window. The stakes: prevent operators from communicating, harming prisoners, or destroying evidence. The FBI reached out to every agency with jurisdiction. State police, railroad authorities, Amtrak police, DEA, ATF, every federal and state entity that might touch a rail segment. 73 agencies were positioned along 23 routes, each ready for the synchronized signal. Contingencies included emergency medical and fire teams in case operators acted violently or sabotaged the trains. Morrison's only fear? That desperate operators might crash their trains deliberately, killing prisoners and evidence. At precisely 2 p.m. Eastern, November 1st, Operation Iron Chain commenced. Across America, 23 freight trains received emergency orders. Mechanical failures, track obstructions, whatever was necessary to force a stop. Some engineers complied immediately. Others hesitated until state police vehicles physically blocked the tracks. Within 17 minutes, all 23 trains halted across 17 states. Helicopters hovered, armored vehicles rumbled on service roads, and FBI tactical teams swarmed the trains with overwhelming force. Federal search in progress. All personnel exit immediately, agents commanded. Confusion and fear rippled through crews. Some guards scrambled to destroy evidence, smashing phones, burning documents, but agents seized everything. The results were horrific. 19 of the 23 trains contained active prisoners, 156 people trapped in hidden compartments. Some had been confined for days, others weeks. One woman had been moved from train to train for 4 months while her family assumed she was dead. Emaciated, disoriented, and psychologically shattered, she collapsed when she realized the date. Constant darkness, ceaseless motion, minimal human contact. Psychological torture had been her companion. Medical teams treated dehydration, malnutrition, and trauma. Some required hospitalization. Meanwhile, Marcus Devine was arrested at his Virginia home before he could flee. Calmly, he stated, "I run a logistics company. I transport freight, legal commerce." The FBI's reply was blunt. "You transport people in prison cars. That's not freight. That's kidnapping." The evidence collected over 6 years was staggering. Every kidnapping meticulously documented, every client, every price, every prisoner movement recorded, 847 names. Of these, 156 were found alive on trains. The rest, dead or released. The investigation expanded to locate them. Prosecutions lasted 3 years. Devine faced 847 counts of kidnapping, 1 per victim, plus conspiracy, wire fraud, human trafficking, money laundering, and numerous other charges. His defense? Clients hired him for legitimate witness, relocation services. The prosecution countered, these cars were engineered for imprisonment. Soundproof, with hidden compartments and chemical toilets. These were kidnapping tools, designed, operated, and profited from by Divine. Testimonies from cooperating guards, freed prisoners, and even clients painted a damning picture. Divine guaranteed permanent disappearance for $2 million per target. The jury convicted him on all counts. 47 consecutive life sentences plus 900 years, assets forfeited. Transcontinental logistics dissolved. Trains and cars were sold. Proceeds went to compensate victims. You weaponized America's rail system, turned trains into mobile prisons, and transported 847 people like cargo, the judge declared. You are a monster. You will die in prison. The 93 train crew and guards faced trials. 67 were convicted, with sentences of 15 to 40 years. 26 were acquitted, genuinely unaware of the hidden compartments, and 6 cooperated in exchange for reduced sentences. Clients, wealthy individuals who paid $2 million per disappearance, proved more difficult. The FBI had emails, wire transfers, and records proving conspiracy. 47 clients were arrested, including business executives, politicians, lawyers, and celebrities. Some cooperated for leniency. Others were convicted with sentences of 20 to 50 years. The 156 freed prisoners faced long-term recovery, psychological trauma, physical rehabilitation, and the arduous process of returning to life outside the darkness of mobile prisons. The damage that didn't end at rescue. The physical rescue was only the beginning. The psychological damage ran far deeper and lingered far longer. "I still can't sleep without feeling motion," one survivor said. "I dream I'm still in that car. It never stops. I'm trapped. The train just keeps moving." For many of the survivors, freedom didn't arrive cleanly. Even in quiet rooms, even on solid ground, their bodies still swayed as if steel wheels were rolling beneath them. Darkness felt familiar. Silence felt dangerous. Movement, any movement, triggered panic. Support services moved quickly. Survivors were given immediate medical treatment, long-term therapy, and financial compensation, drawn from Marcus Divine's seized assets. On average, each victim received about $2.8 million. It helped with housing, treatment, education, and starting over. But no amount of money could undo months of isolation, fear, and sensory deprivation. The harder truth lay with the missing. Of the 847 documented victims, 691 were not found on the trains. The FBI launched one of the most extensive missing persons investigations in United States history. Some victims were discovered alive, released in remote areas, abandoned with nothing, surviving quietly in fear. Many were too traumatized to come forward. Others believed Divine's threats, that rescue would never come, and silence was the only way to stay alive. Agents worked patiently, convincing survivors they were finally safe. Families were reunited, lives were pieced back together. But many victims were never found. Bodies surfaced slowly, years later, in rivers, wilderness areas, abandoned mines, places so vast and unforgiving that recovery was often impossible. DNA identification brought closure where it could. For many families, closure came only in fragments, a confirmation without remains, a final answer without a goodbye. Financial compensation was offered. It helped, but it didn't replace the people who never came home. Michael Torres, the journalist whose emergency beacon triggered Operation Iron Chain, became a national advocate for trafficking prevention and infrastructure accountability. "I was lucky," he said later. "I had a beacon. Most of them didn't. They disappeared into moving prisons, some forever." The railroad industry couldn't ignore what had happened. Reforms followed swiftly. Mandatory freight car inspections, random checks, enhanced surveillance, federal oversight, and stricter controls on modifications. Hidden compartments became harder and riskier to build and operate. A railroad spokesperson admitted what many had never questioned. "We assumed freight cars carried freight, not people. We've corrected that assumption." Congress responded with the Railway Security Enhancement Act, funding advanced detection technology capable of identifying human presence inside cargo areas. Penalties for using rail systems in kidnappings were dramatically increased. The 117 modified prison cars were publicly destroyed, crushed, melted down, and recycled into a memorial sculpture. What were once instruments of confinement became a reminder carved in steel. Vigilance matters. The FBI created a permanent task force to monitor freight companies nationwide. Devine wasn't the first to weaponize infrastructure, the task force leader said, and he won't be the last. That's why we're watching. Here's the answer to the earlier question. Most FBI multi-state train interdictions take hours, sometimes days, to coordinate across jurisdictions. Operation Iron Chain took 17 minutes. 17 minutes to stop 23 trains across 17 states simultaneously. It worked because the FBI positioned assets in advance, secured blanket emergency authorities, and executed with near-military precision. Every minute mattered. A single warning could have triggered executions, derailments, or mass destruction of evidence. 17 minutes saved 156 lives. Marcus Devine now sits in a Supermax facility, locked in permanent isolation. His $240 million fortune is gone. His company dissolved. His rail cars were reduced to scrap. His name is now synonymous with exploitation and cruelty, but he's not the only one out there who has exploited gaps in laws to do horrifying things. Far from it. When infrastructure becomes a weapon. The nightmare Michael Torres endured, trapped in darkness, tossed across states in a moving prison, might seem like the stuff of fiction. But as horrifying as transcontinental logistics was, history shows that people have weaponized infrastructure, commerce, and transportation to kidnap, detain, and disappear humans long before mobile prisons existed. Kidnapping is as old as civilization itself. In ancient Rome, debtors could be seized and held in chains until repayment, or sold into slavery. In medieval Europe, feuds between lords often involved hostage-taking, where enemies' sons or daughters were held in castles until terms were met. Across continents, merchants and pirates alike saw humans as cargo. In 18th century Africa, coastal traders captured villagers and sold them into the transatlantic slave trade, packing them into ships designed to carry hundreds in near-impossible conditions, mirroring the claustrophobic horror of modern hidden compartments. Fast forward to the 20th century. Kidnappings evolved but retained the same logic: control, leverage, and profit. In 1976, Victor Liut, a wealthy industrialist's son in Mexico, was kidnapped and held in a nondescript safe house. His captors moved him constantly between buildings and vehicles to avoid detection, relying on mobility rather than the walls themselves to conceal him. He survived, but the psychological toll left him haunted for years, a real-life echo of Torres's experience on the rails. In 1974, Italy faced the terror of the Red Brigades, who kidnapped businessman Aldo Moro. His captors moved him between apartments and safe houses, exploiting jurisdictional gaps in law enforcement. Police struggled to track him because the locations were constantly changing. After 55 days, he was executed, highlighting a grim truth. Stationary prisons are easier to find, but mobility creates near-perfect concealment for criminals. Marcus Devine exploited this exact principle, only he turned freight trains into rolling hells. Another chilling example occurred in Argentina during the 1970s Dirty War. Political dissidents were abducted, held in clandestine detention centers, and transported in unmarked vehicles. Many were never seen again. Their mobility, the secrecy of their locations, and the complicity of certain infrastructures, like hospitals and government offices, mirrored Devine's logistical genius, but with far more deadly consequences. Even in the United States, high-profile kidnappings have taken advantage of everyday infrastructure. In 1976, the infamous kidnapping of Patty Hearst by the Symbionese Liberation Army involved moving her through multiple safe houses, cars, and storage units to evade law enforcement. The psychological manipulation, the disorientation, and the constant motion created a modern mobile prison, albeit without mechanical rails. Devine's mobile prisons were unique in scale and method, But the principle is universal. Kidnappers exploit systems designed for commerce, transport, or societal function. In India, the 1990s saw a spike in dacoit kidnappings, where gangs would hold wealthy villagers in rural hideouts, moving them through forests and abandoned warehouses. Law enforcement had to trace their path along old dirt roads, rivers, and tracks. Transport corridors meant for trade became tools of terror. In Colombia, the 1980s and 1990s brought the Medellin cartel and FARC's infamous hostage corridors. Kidnapped politicians, journalists, and civilians were moved along jungle paths and riverways, sometimes in armored vehicles disguised as local freight transport. Prisoners were relocated constantly, some held for years, just like Divine's victims shuffled from one train to another. Psychological torture, food deprivation, and isolation were common. Many survivors reported ongoing trauma, nightmares, and fear of motion, echoing the haunting experience of Michael Torres. Modern times haven't ended the threat. In 2014, the kidnapping of schoolgirls by Boko Haram in Nigeria highlighted the power of mobility. The captors exploited roads, motorcycles, and rural paths to avoid government detection. Entire communities watched helplessly as infrastructure, normally meant to connect people, became a tool of imprisonment. Survivors carried physical and psychological scars remarkably similar to those described by Torres and the other 156 freed from Divine's trains. Even beyond high-profile terrorism or organized crime, human trafficking rings exploit transportation networks. In Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, traffickers often hide victims in shipping containers, buses, and trucks, moving them across borders under the guise of legitimate commerce. Authorities have discovered hundreds of victims crammed into freighters, some surviving weeks without sunlight or communication. The parallels to the soundproofed boxcars of transcontinental logistics are striking. Infrastructure itself becomes the prison, with mobility ensuring law enforcement struggles to intercept the crime. Historically, law enforcement has always been at a disadvantage when infrastructure is weaponized. In 1960s Chicago, a series of high-profile kidnappings of mob associates revealed how easily moving prisoners could evade detection. Hidden basements, secreted rooms, and mobile storage units allowed captors to stay one step ahead. Only through painstaking mapping of communication and transport patterns were authorities able to track and rescue the victims. Divine's innovation wasn't the creation of mobile prisons. It was the industrialization of the concept on a massive scale, using freight trains to operate continuously, untraceably, and efficiently. The psychological consequences for survivors of such crimes are universal. Many report long-term trauma, anxiety about motion, inability to sleep, and chronic fear. After Divine's operation, the FBI and support agencies provided therapy, medical care, and financial compensation to survivors. But money does not erase the trauma. Survivors from historical cases, from Patty Hearst to Boko Haram victims, recount similar lifelong struggles. Flashbacks, hypervigilance, mistrust of infrastructure, and fear of being moved again. The human cost of mobility-based imprisonment is immeasurable. Legislation has evolved in response. In the United States, the Railway Security Enhancement Act, passed after high-profile incidents like Divine's, introduced mandatory inspections, technological sensors for human presence, and federal oversight. Globally, anti-trafficking laws and border control technologies are increasingly aimed at detecting victims being moved via transportation systems. Yet the risk persists. Criminals innovate faster than regulations can catch up. These incidents remind us of a sobering truth. Mobility can be exploited to hide crimes, confuse law enforcement, and terrorize victims. From ancient Rome to modern freight networks, kidnappers have adapted to infrastructure rather than being constrained by it. What Divine did on trains, others have done in ships, vehicles, safe houses, and remote pathways across the world. And in every case, coordination, vigilance, and intelligence, like Agent Morrison's in Operation Iron Chain, make the difference between life and death. History teaches us that mobile imprisonment is not new. But with modern logistics, technology, and scale, it becomes industrialized, systematic, and terrifyingly efficient. And while Michael Torres and Agent Morrison's heroism demonstrates the heights of law enforcement coordination, the global record of kidnappings and trafficking underscores the enduring importance of public awareness, systemic reform, and infrastructure oversight. How kidnapping evolved, and how the FBI learned to run faster. By the time Operation Iron Chain ended, one truth was impossible to ignore. Kidnapping didn't just survive the modern world, it adapted to it, quietly, efficiently, sometimes invisibly. What Marcus Devine built wasn't an anomaly. It was the latest mutation of an old crime learning new tricks. Kidnapping used to be blunt, a snatch on a street corner, a ransom note, a waiting phone call. The criminal needed proximity, muscle, and time. Law enforcement needed patience, informants, and luck. Everyone knew the rules. Then the world sped up. Globalization, digital finance, mass transit, encrypted communication. Every convenience designed to connect people also created new ways to hide them. Kidnappers noticed, and they adjusted faster than anyone wanted to admit. In the modern era, kidnapping stopped being about holding someone still. It became about keeping them moving. Instead of basements, there were vans. Instead of warehouses, there were safe apartments rented under fake names. Instead of ransom calls, there were cryptocurrency wallets. The victim didn't disappear into one place anymore. They vanished into systems. Human traffickers were among the first to master this shift. Victims were moved through bus stations, ports, and border crossings using forged documents and bribed officials. Shipping containers became cages. Fishing vessels became floating prisons. Entire supply chains were hijacked without ever stopping commerce. The crime hid in plain sight. Organized crime followed. In Latin America, cartels stopped keeping hostages in fixed camps and began rotating them through rural roads, abandoned farmhouses, and river routes. Each move erased a trail. Each relocation reset the clock for law enforcement. Survivors later described the same sensation Michael Torres felt: motion without meaning, days blending together, time dissolving. Even lone kidnappers adapted. Ride-sharing apps were exploited. Fake delivery jobs lured victims into vehicles. Short-term rental platforms provided anonymous holding spaces. Burner phones became obsolete. Encrypted messaging apps replaced them. Payment methods went from duffel bags of cash to untraceable digital transfers routed through half a dozen countries in seconds. Kidnapping became modular, flexible, and scalable. And for a while, law enforcement lagged behind. Early investigations struggled because the old assumptions no longer worked. Police searched buildings when the victim was already gone. They traced phone calls that no longer existed. They followed money trails that evaporated into blockchains. Jurisdiction became a nightmare. Crimes crossed cities, states, and borders before paperwork could catch up. The FBI saw the pattern emerging in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Kidnappings were lasting longer. Victims were harder to locate. Recovery rates dropped in cases involving constant movement. It wasn't just about criminals being smarter, it was about them exploiting the speed of modern infrastructure. So the Bureau changed how it thought. Instead of focusing only on where a victim might be, investigators began mapping how they might be moved. Highways, rail corridors, shipping routes, financial rails, digital platforms. The question shifted from where are they holding this person to what system are they using to move them. That shift changed everything. Behavioral analysis units started studying mobility patterns rather than static crime scenes. Analysts looked for anomalies in logistics data, rental histories, travel manifests, and financial transactions. A truck that stopped too often, a cargo route that didn't make economic sense, a company that moved goods without a clear supply chain. Patterns spoke when locations stayed silent. Technology helped close the gap. Cell tower triangulation gave way to metadata analysis. Who communicated with whom, how often, and when communication suddenly stopped. License plate readers tracked vehicles across counties in minutes. Satellite imagery flagged unusual stops in remote areas. Sensors designed for safety began detecting human presence where none should exist. But technology alone wasn't enough. The FBI learned that speed mattered more than perfection. Waiting for certainty meant losing victims. So protocols changed. Emergency authorities expanded. Multi-agency task forces trained together before crises happened. Relationships were built in advance, not during the emergency. Operation Iron Chain was the product of that evolution. Stopping 23 trains across 17 states in 17 minutes didn't happen because of heroics in the moment. It happened because the FBI had already accepted a hard truth. Modern kidnapping could only be beaten with modern coordination. You couldn't outthink a moving prison unless you could move faster than it. The Bureau also learned to listen to survivors. Victim testimony revealed patterns no algorithm could catch. The rhythm of guard visits, the timing of food deliveries, the sounds of specific engines, the feeling of curves versus straightaways. Survivors became living maps of their captivity. What once sounded like trauma-induced confusion became actionable intelligence when analyzed properly. Training evolved accordingly. Agents were taught not just how to negotiate, but how to interpret disorientation. Not just how to raid buildings, but how to intercept vehicles, vessels, and systems. Negotiators worked alongside cyber analysts. Tactical teams trained with transportation authorities. The silos that once slowed responses were dismantled. Kidnappers, of course, didn't stop adapting. Some shifted toward psychological kidnapping, coercing victims into compliance without physical confinement. Threats delivered digitally, family members targeted remotely, victims forced to move themselves under instruction, turning their own freedom into the cage. Others exploited migration crises, blending abductions into mass displacement. In those cases, the crime wasn't a single act. It was a process hidden inside chaos. The FBI responded by expanding its definition of captivity. A locked door was no longer required. If control existed, through fear, movement, or dependency, it counted. That legal and conceptual shift allowed prosecutions that would have failed a decade earlier. International cooperation intensified. Kidnapping had become global. Enforcement had to follow. Shared databases, joint task forces, and real-time intelligence exchanges became standard. A ransom paid in Europe could trigger an arrest in South America. A trafficker flagged in Asia could be stopped at a United States port. The world shrank for criminals who once relied on distance. Public awareness became another weapon. Emergency beacons, safety apps, training for journalists, aid workers, and travelers. What saved Michael Torres wasn't luck, it was preparation. The FBI began quietly encouraging high-risk professionals to carry redundant tracking and distress tools, understanding that in a moving captivity scenario, a single signal could mean the difference between rescue and disappearance. Legislation followed reality. Laws expanded to criminalize the misuse of infrastructure itself. Using transportation systems for kidnapping became an aggravating factor with harsher penalties. Companies were required to know not just what they transported, but how and why. Plausible deniability stopped being plausible. And yet the lesson of the modern era is not comfort, it's vigilance. Every advance creates a vulnerability. Autonomous vehicles, smart cities, AI-managed logistics. Each innovation makes life easier and gives criminals something new to exploit. The FBI knows this. That's why modern kidnapping units don't just investigate crimes. They study futures. What happens when prisons don't need guards? When movement is automated? When digital identities can be erased as easily as physical ones? The next Marcus Divine won't copy trains. He'll find the next blind spot. That's the quiet race no one sees. And the only thing standing between motion and disappearance is the ability to stop the system cold. Please click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos.